Good evening. I'm Alice Knapp, Executive Director of the New Canaan Library. It is my pleasure to welcome you, along with Ray Giolongo, Jr., Chairman and CEO of First County Bank, to the 2012 Conversations with Business Leaders. And as I speak, please take this moment to turn off your cell phones. Lectures such as this one do not happen in a vacuum. In this case, it is the members of the Conversations with Business Leaders Committee who have worked to assemble this great program. Their names are listed in the program, and it is without them, and it is due to them, that we are here for an evening with Jeffrey Immelt. Thank you. Following the lecture, there will be time for Q&As, and if you have a question, please go to the two standing microphones. We'll be moving up a little bit closer onto the platforms. It is important that you go this way so that we can all hear your questions. There will be a reception following the program in the fireside commons. Most importantly, I want to say thank you to First County Bank, who has helped underwrite this program. Right?
Thank you. Thank you, Alice, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to kick off what I think is one of the New Canaan Library's signature events, certainly a signature event for the year. I feel compelled a little bit to say a few words as perhaps a fellow CEO, Jeff, a much smaller organization. Being a CEO of a community bank places me and all of my employees on the ground in a number of nonprofit agencies, especially the New Canaan Library, for example. We have, in fact, at the bank this past year reached our $5 million mark in giving from our foundation. But I believe that we have a place in the market not only to do business, but also in a place of community responsibility, certainly as does GE. I really want to thank Mr. Immelt, GE, and on the ground locally in our marketplace, GE Capital especially, for taking a leadership role with any number of nonprofits in Fairfield County. Your financial support in the areas of education and affordable housing really mean a lot to many, many nonprofits in the area, and it's certainly welcome. But more importantly, I think, than the money, the GE employees and alumni in the marketplace have a really special skill set and a special business acumen that make them welcome on any number of nonprofit boards as nonprofit facilitators or community members on committee boards. So I thank you for that. You've hosted a lot of nonprofit activities, and your employees do a wonderful job in the marketplace. With that, I want to turn this back over to Alice, and thank you all for joining us today.
And as much as we appreciate our business partner, we also appreciate the many individuals and families in our community who believe in the library's mission and support the library with their gifts to our annual appeal. These contributions are what make it possible to buy books, movies, and music and bring great programs to our town. We could not do it without your support. So thank you to those who have made a gift this year, and for those who haven't yet, there's still time. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the 2011 Conversations with Business Leaders speaker, George Bodenheimer. He's co-chairman of Disney Media Networks, president, ESPN, Inc., and ABC Sports. And welcome.
Thank you, Alice. It's great, really great to be here with all of you on such a beautiful Sunday afternoon here in New Canaan. I want to congratulate Alice on the continued success of the many programs offered here at the library. This speaker series certainly being a prime example of the terrific work being done by Alice and her staff. They consistently produce such high-quality programs, and we're all makes a better town. So thank you very much, Alice. Of course, nothing happens without teamwork. In sports and in business, Teamwork is essential to success. Today's guest speaker, Jeff Immelt, knows very well that the lessons we learn in athletics translate well beyond the fields, courts, and diamonds. Indeed, those lessons last a lifetime. Determination, courage, hard work in pursuit of a common goal, these are just some of the qualities that Jeff demonstrated as a football player for Dartmouth, where as a 6'4" offensive tackle, he towered over his competitors. Today, Jeff towers over industry with a drive and a vision demonstrated during the days fighting the good fight for his beloved Big Green. Jeff, of course, is truly a global CEO, leading a GE company with over $147 billion in annual revenues, 300,000 plus employees, 130,000 and growing, of which are here in the United States. His company is as broad as it is successful, leading the way in everything from appliances, MRI machines, and jet engines to industrial finance, lighting, and energy solutions. Of course, success like this doesn't just happen, or it doesn't happen overnight. And of course, it doesn't just happen either. It is the result of Jeff's determination, optimism, and unending commitment to innovation. And of course, his ability to inspire others to believe the same. A true GE man, he has worked at the company for over 30 years, following in his dad's footsteps. It is truly a pleasure for me to introduce Jeff today, not only because I'm a fan of his business acumen, but also because Jeff is a man who donates so generously of his time to give back, including his efforts to serve our country. Jeff cares about people, and he cares about communities such as ours. His presence here tonight in support of one of New Canaan's most treasured assets, our library, is a good example of this. With that, it is now my pleasure and honor to introduce Jeff Immelt.
It's great to be here. You know, my daughter graduated from St. Luke's in 2005, so it's great to be back at St. Luke's. It was about half the size when she was there. I had a panic attack when I got in my car this evening because it's been 5 or 6 years since I've been here, and I wasn't sure I could find my way back, but thank God I made it, so it's great to be back at St. Luke's. I'm going to do 4 things really quickly. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economy. I'm going to give you kind of some things that I see working in this country today, so hopefully it'll make you more optimistic when you leave. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we've done on the Jobs Council, and then I'm going to end with a little discussion on leadership. So I would say in the economy, there's 4 things I look at when I get up in the morning. You know, one is China, because China is important not just for what it means for the country itself, but it also is the source of growth for lots of the world, Brazil, Africa, Russia, other places in the world. And my view is that, you know, when you think your economy is slowing down to 8%, that's not so bad. You know, so when you start thinking that 8% GDP growth is bad, that's not so bad. And I think in some ways China will continue to grow. Is probably one of the strong, I'd say, macroeconomic stories of the 21st century, and will always be important in the United States. So I think about that. I think about Europe, you know, and as we sit here today on Sunday, it looks like Sarkozy has lost in France. So the socialists are back in power in France, and Europe's tough. I think the best case in Europe is bad, and the worst case is disaster. So we're somewhere between bad and disaster in Europe. I think my read is it will probably turn out to be just slow economic growth for a long time in Europe. You know, barring some kind of major disaster like a bank explosion or something like that, it's just going to mean that the region has to restructure with lots of fiscal issues, and we all are going to have to be watching Europe for a long time. The United States actually gets a little bit better every day. Housing remains probably the most difficult. I'd say housing has bottomed. But you just see more signs of strength more broadly in the U.S. economy every day. And then you have this specter of the elections and kind of a fiscal challenge at the end of the year when the tax cuts expire, things like that, that concern people that I worry about as the year goes on. But the U.S. just feels a little bit better. And then the fourth thing I think about is inflation. Inflation at the gas pump, inflation of raw materials, inflation in food. And that seems to be more or less in check. So if I gave you a kind of a perspective on the economy, I'd say slightly better with more volatility. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and feel great. This is something that inside GE, I try to convince people that it could feel this way for a long time, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. We might feel exactly, slow economic growth, a little bit of volatility. And so I just think mentally we have to get ourselves prepared that that is what's called the new normal. And if you go to bed tonight and you expect to wake up in 1997 again, you're going to wake up unhappy. And if you go to bed tonight and say, hey, I'm ready to go in this new economy, you're going to be happy. And I always vote for happiness, not unhappiness. So I just think you need to get yourself accustomed to where we are today. For companies, I just think it means you're going to have to invest. You're going to have to play offense and defense at the same time. You've got to globalize. And that's the panorama that you're going to have to look at. Now, GE, in that context, we'll be somewhere probably between $155 and $160 billion in revenue this year. For the first time since the crisis, both our industrial and financial service businesses will grow more than 10% this year. We're the world's biggest industrial company, about $110 billion infrastructure company. We lead in all the big, capital goods, aircraft engines, healthcare equipment, big market shares. We spend about 6% of our revenue back into R&D, so we're a $6 billion plus R&D player. 65% of our business is outside the United States. We're one of the leaders in heavy-duty gas turbines. We'll ship maybe 140 heavy-duty gas turbines this year. Less than 5 will go to the United States. So we are a big, strong global player. We've got about a $425 billion in asset financial service business, primarily in the mid-market space. If you were in financial services the day Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, it has been a tough neighborhood for the last 4 or 5 years. It's actually a better business than people think today. I'd say maybe before the crisis, people overestimated where financial service was. I think now they underestimated. And actually, our financial service business, I think this year will be quite healthy. Losses are lower, margins are better. So that's really GE. If we had the same price-earnings ratio today that we had 10 years ago when I became CEO, you'd have a $65 stock. That's not where we are today. So that's either something to plan for or good news on the horizon. But you only go through kind of a PE compression like we've been through once in your lifetime. And I say most business, GE's not alone, but if IBM or Honeywell or other companies are up here today, they tell you business is pretty good. We feel competitive. We feel optimistic. We're investing. And we kind of look and see, I've been doing this for a long time. I've never seen American business more competitive vis-a-vis Asia, China, India, places like that than I do today. Our factories are more competitive. Our people are more competitive than at any time, on a relative basis, than at any time in my career. So to start off, I think the economy kind of is what it is. You're not going to wake up in the morning and read a new pattern that I think emerges in the near future. GE is well positioned, I think, to be successful in the environment that we're in today. And we've kind of changed or adjusted in order to be able to compete and win in that arena. So that's the world. Now, if you pick up the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or Financial Times any given day, you are going to be bummed out most days. It is easy to get depressed about the state of the world, the state of politics, all the bad things that are going on in the country, et cetera, et cetera. I guess what I want to do in the next period of time is just tell you you don't need to feel so bad, and that there's some things out there that are working, and some things I think are going to be great potential when you look in the future. And I would start with one fundamental for companies and for the country in terms of where we're at today. Investment in technology and innovation. Technology and innovation. It is the single most important thing we do as a company. I think to a certain extent, business fell in love with the science of management and fell out of love with the science of science. That's changing. I'm not saying that management's not important. Of course, we think it's important. But having really great products, having really great innovation is what it's all about. GE spends 6% of our revenue back into R&D. As a country, we spend 2%. Our relative R&D as a percentage of GDP has basically been cut in half over the last 30 years. We graduate 135,000 engineers in the United States every year. China and India graduate 1 million between them. That is not a way to lead. I was in Silicon Valley on Friday. That is now, I would say, the industrial hub of the United States. It's not New York City anymore. It's not Chicago anymore. It's Silicon Valley because they have the technology, they have the science, they have the innovation. So when I think about what works, what has to work, it starts with science, technology, innovation. And when we apply it, when we do it, there's nobody in the world that can beat us. We work with Boeing on their 787. We do a new engine that's 25% more efficient than what it replaces. Boeing will then go out and gain market share in their marketplace. That's all American innovation. That's the strength. And that's what we have to go back to. So that's what works. Manufacturing, number 2. Supply chain innovation. It's more than just like Clint Eastwood and a Chrysler ad at halftime of the Super Bowl. This really is a resurgence going on in the United States. Material is expensive today. Labor as a relative percentage is less expensive. We're just going through the process of moving all of our appliances back from Mexico and China back to Louisville, Kentucky. Okay? Now, we don't do that because we run a charity. We do it because we run a business. We are able to make, let's say, a refrigerator in 1.9 hours of labor through lean manufacturing. We've got more innovation. We're closer to our markets. Our quality is going to be higher. These are things we wouldn't have thought of 10, 15, 20 years ago. I could tell you the same story in aviation. I could tell you the same story in our energy business. GE will export about $20 billion this year. We're the country's second biggest exporter. We have to like making things again. We have to value manufacturing. We have to value a supply chain. And I think that can be a source of strength, a source of job creation in the United States going forward. So that's number 2. The third thing is just this whole notion of software and the internet, which has basically dominated social media, Facebook, Twitter, things like that. In the next, I'd say 5 years, because I don't think it'll take longer than that, digital analytical tools is going to dominate the industrial space as well. Tell you a brief story about an aircraft engine, not to make you an expert, but all the airlines together last year lost about $3 billion combined. If you just took GE's installed base of engines, and if we could improve their fuel performance by 1 percentage point, that would earn our customers $3 billion. $3 billion, 1 percentage point. So if you take data off an engine, we take about 90,000 parameters off a jet engine every year. If we can model that to better performance, we can make our customers more productive. So all the effort that's been put into Facebook, Twitter, social media, that's all now going to be directed to man-to-machine interface in the next 5 years. And this is a place we want to be in the forefront, but this is just, I think, again, going to revolutionize the United States, make us even more competitive as time goes on. So that's working. Number 4, globalization. People in the U.S. hate globalization, hate it. I'm not going to convince you that you shouldn't feel that way. I can just tell you that it's a reality, that there's going to be 1 billion consumers join the middle class in the next decade. There's going to be 3 billion new consumers join the middle class by 2035. And there's someplace else. So you either accept that reality as an opportunity and decide to go pursue it, or you're going to get left behind. I fill up my gas down at the Exxon station in New Canaan. I don't know how many people use that station. It's pretty damn expensive, right? Pretty damn expensive. The price, by the way, isn't set by the people of New Canaan. The price of that gallon of gasoline is being set in India or China or Brazil, not here. And that's just the reality of where we are today. Now, we'll have 7 countries that cross $1 billion of revenue at GE by 2014. I'll just read them off to you. Algeria, Nigeria, South Africa, Venezuela, Turkey, Czech Republic, and Indonesia. When I was in high school, I couldn't find any of these places on a map. But now these are places that are growing, where people are buying power generation. There's almost 2 billion people without electricity today. These are our customers of the future. These are the opportunities that are going to put people back to work in this country. So the fourth point I make is globalization is a good thing. It's a place where we can compete and win, and it's one of the things that's going to drive the future. So win around the world. The fifth thing that works is I'm convinced, having been around a long time, that we can actually manage the cost of health care, but only if we put our minds to it. We've done 2 things at GE. We spend about $3 billion on employee health care every year. We've got lots of current employees, lots of retirees, and we want them to be healthy, and we want to take good care of them ultimately, but we have to do it in a cost-effective way. And we have set a goal for ourselves to get the inflation of healthcare down to the CPI, Consumer Price Index, so that it only grows about 3% a year. And basically, to do that, we have to do 2 things. The first thing is to make all of our employees better consumers of healthcare, and we do that by a consumer-directed plan. High deductible, and whatever our employees can save, they can put on their 401k program to save it, but they have to be active consumers of healthcare. And the second thing we do is we approach the big cities that GE competes in. There's 15 big cities in the US, and we try collectively, working with small and big business in the city, to lower the rate of inflation in that town. We focus on Cincinnati to start with. The cost per employee in Cincinnati has gone down 3% a year for the last 3 years for GE. And so we're starting to get the sense that together we can control this, but it's going to have to happen town by town, and the private sector has to get involved. You can have your own opinions on whether or not you like President Obama's healthcare plan, but we're going to be talking about healthcare every year for the rest of our lives. Doesn't matter who the president is, doesn't matter what plan you like, we're going to be talking about this every year for the rest of our lives. So we better get about private sector engagement, productivity, consumerism, the things that are going to move the needle. But I'm starting to feel better about that as being not so crippling and a source of competitiveness going forward. So that works. I think that can work. The next thing is energy. By 2020, I'm completely convinced that this country can be self-sufficient if it chose, but more importantly, have a real energy future. This country has probably as much or more natural gas than any country in the world. We have great applicability in renewables, wind and solar. We have lots of coal. We have lots of choices. If any other country in the world had the amount of natural gas that the United States had, people would be partying in the streets right now. They would see that as a form of national exports, national wealth creation, job creation. State of Ohio, where President Obama was yesterday, has 7.5% unemployment. There are an ample amount of people that are working what's called the Utica seam of natural gas in eastern Ohio, that those jobs didn't exist 3 years ago. So if we had a real plan, you'd have an opportunity to really make this country energy sufficient, self-sufficient in the future. So I think energy can work in the United States. Education. You live it here, we're in a school. Education has to be one of the things that we think about. 2 areas that I would focus on. One is community colleges. Community colleges have to be a big part of where we go in the future. There are 2 million open jobs as we sit here today. With 8.1% unemployment and a subpar jobs number on Friday, there are 2 million open jobs as we stand here today that people don't have the training to go get. That's where community colleges come in. It's the work that they can do. So education can be a source of national competitiveness as we look at the future. The other bookend that I would put on that is engineering. Paul Odolini, who's CEO of Intel, worked with me on the Jobs Council. His idea is to get 10,000 more engineers graduating from the United States every year. So to go from 135,000 to 145,000, 155,000. The problem with engineering in college is that it's hard. 75% of the people that go to college to be an engineer drop out by the time they're a senior. So Paul's idea is to try to be able to say to everybody who's in high school, if you go do 4 years of engineering, graduate, and actually go to work as an engineer, not on Wall Street or other places, go to work as an engineer, we will make sure that your education gets paid for, and we will give you internships as you're going forward to get your degree. Pretty compelling in terms of how to get people to be better engineers. So I think education can be a place that can work again. Public-private partnerships, I know we're sitting in Connecticut, but you know, we need to study other states sitting in this area. We do business in Texas, we do business in Mississippi. We have added employees, we've created 3,000 new jobs in Mississippi, 5,000 in Texas in the last decade, new jobs. It's by working with the government, not on handouts, but on ways to work with colleges, ways to train people. Regulatory cycle times that in the Northeast would take 10 times longer than they take in states like that. It's the notion that government can be hungry for work, the notion that government can be focused on business. That has to take place in public-private partnerships around the country. Let me tell you, other countries are aggressive and working hard along those lines. But I'm very much a believer that when the public sector and the private sector work together, you can move things forward. So we think that can work in the country. So technology, manufacturing, industrial internet, globalization, healthcare, energy, public-private partnerships, education. Every one of these things can work in the United States. Every one of them. We can be better than the best. We can find ways to improve. I'm here to tell you, lots of things can work, and we see it happening every day. The last thing I would talk about is just teamwork. You know, when you work in GE's got 300,000 employees, and we've got about 140,000, a little bit more than that in the United States. The people that work for GE actually kind of like the company. You know? Like when I walk through a factory, I like the people that work there, and they like me, because we work together. It's our investments in R&D. It's our global sales force. It's you know, my dad worked in our aircraft engine business for 40 years. That business is booming right now, filled with manufacturing workers. 90% of their business is outside the United States. When I walk through the factory, they're not saying, I hate you, you're in the 1%, what's wrong with you? They're saying, how do we get more jobs? How do we work together to get more jobs? And so I think we've made these artificial divisions instead of focusing on the things where people work together in terms of how to get stuff done. So never devalue the importance of teamwork, how reliant we are on everybody that walks through the door every day to get the work done, and how hard we try to provide not just profit for our investors, but good high-paying jobs for a long period of time. So be more optimistic. Don't read as much as you usually read. I find it's better that if you just don't read the paper, you don't miss it that much. And I can actually say now that we only own 49% of NBC, you can watch the news 49% as much as you used to watch the news. So that's what works today. A third thing to talk about is the Jobs Council. There are 26 of us working on the Jobs Council, big company CEOs, small businesses, union leaders, economists. The president was a great partner in terms of trying to get work done. We put forward 85 recommendations. About 40 of them don't require bipartisan legislation, which, you know, is really key if you want to get anything done, is you have to move around the system. You know, I think the group worked hard, dedicated to it. I think right now we're trying to see how many of these ideas that we can get done. Really the only piece of legislation that will probably get done this year is the Jobs Act. That was done by Steve Case, who was on the Jobs Council. You know, what we try to do is stay focused on things that were practical and that would work. You know, the one I would give you an example of is we basically have lost 50% of our market share in global travel over the past decade, 50% of our market share. And the problem is it takes 6 months. If you're in Brazil and you want to go to Europe, you don't need a visa. If you're in Brazil and you want to go to the United States on vacation, it takes you 6 months. So, you know, if you're going on vacation, guess where you're going to go? You're going to go to Paris when you want to go to Washington, D.C. And just by reducing the cycle time on things like that, you can create 250,000 jobs in the travel and leisure industry. So those were the kinds of things we tried to work on, the things that were practical that could move the needle in the short term. I tell you, the things I learned about job creation on a macro sense or on a country sense. The first thing is be specific. Talk about the micro and not the macro. You know, in other words, we can talk about unemployment and 8.1%. That's not how you make unemployment go down, is by talking about 8.1%. You've got to know who's unemployed, where they live, and how you get them back to work. So in New York City, something like 400 people go to work every Monday morning. New employees go to work in the healthcare industry every Monday morning in New York City. So the trick is, how do you get people trained to take healthcare jobs in New York City? And you've got to have a micro plan that's driven by mayors and local business people, the people in this room, if you want to move the needle on creating jobs. If you want to fill open jobs, you've got to work on training in the short term. In other words, if you want to do something about jobs in the next year, there's probably only two big levers you can pull. One is to increase the cycle time on training, and the other one is to do something about permitting and regulation. And one of the things we try to do inside the Jobs Council is really work on permitting cycle time. You know, regulation, look, I'm a CEO, I don't like regulation, you know. If you were a progressive Democratic senator, you like regulation, right? So we tried not to get in the middle of that war. Rather, we said, you know, if you're trying to get a permit for a transmission line to go across state lines that would create jobs, that now takes 12 years just to get a piece of paper to connect something across state lines, 12 years. That seems too long to me, right? I don't know how you feel, but that's, you know, and basically almost every piece of government, you can cut the cycle time by 90% and not miss a thing. So if they just had a focus on efficiency, that would pull jobs forward and create jobs. So those are the things in the short term. I would say in the medium term, the two big leverage points are small business. Small business got crushed in the downturn. And, you know, the fact is at GE, we've got enough overhead that we can muscle through regulation, but small businesses, it's become impossible. And so I've gotten a much better appreciation for how do you help small business, because their new business formation is probably 40% below this economic cycle or was last economic cycle. So you got to do something about small business. And you have to do something about infrastructure, both for long-term competitiveness, but there's 3 million construction workers out of work right now, and the only place they're going to go back to work is probably in infrastructure. So you got to do, you know, something about those two things on that side. And the last thing I'd say is just we will never have 5 or 6% unemployment unless we work on competitiveness first. Our regulatory system, our education system, our tax system, they're all antiquated. Exxon's got these great commercials now that talk about where the U.S. in math and science. If we're number 25 in math and number 26 in science, that's not conducive to job creation over the long term. So we're going to have to do stuff about competitiveness. But look, we all did the best we could in a public-private way on the Jobs Council. I think everybody took it seriously. We'll try to get as much done as we can. You know, you're in the election cycle now, so most days we're just trying to keep our head down. But it's, you know, I think it's what we try to do. Last thing on leadership, I think, you know, I've done this now about 10 years. The difference of people that have been around, George and others that have been around the last 10 years, I think, versus previous times is just, you know, we've seen tail risk. You know, over the last decade in a way that we hadn't seen it over the previous 30 years. We've seen 2 recessions, financial crisis, 9/11, BP oil spill, Hurricane Katrina, 2 wars. So it makes you, I think it makes you a better risk manager. It makes you humbler. You learn how to play offense and defense at the same time. And I just think that is what shaped leadership over the past decade versus the previous, really almost 40 or 50 years. You just see more tail risk, more volatility today than almost any time in history. I remember calling a GE alumni during the financial crisis in September of 2008. I just needed somebody to talk to. I thought I was going crazy. And he said, yeah, it reminds me of like 1997 when the Russian ruble devalued. And I said, I'll call you back, okay? Because like that would have been the best 5 minutes during that time period. You said, oh, thank you, God. It was only the Russian ruble that devalued. You know, it's just everything has been reset. And in some ways, I think it makes us better managers, makes us better leaders, having lived through that amount of crisis and volatility over that period of time. And I'll end just with, you know, 5 things I think about vis-a-vis leadership. I think about learning. So good leaders always know how to learn. You know, a good leader has to be curious, has to be open, has to read a lot, has to understand things, has to see people. You've got to be a learner. A good leader has to make choices. You have to make choices. You know, one of the things that you're seeing in the government today is we have to do something about the deficit. We have to probably do something like Simpson-Bowles. What makes Simpson-Bowles hard? You have to make choices. So that's what good leaders do. The third thing they do is you have to act. You have to make decisions, take actions that you can be accountable for. You have to act if you want to be a leader. The fourth thing you do is you have to build. You have to know that most things get built over time. You have to be persistent when times are tough. And you have to be willing to build businesses over a long period of time. You know, one of the places that I wanted to take GE when I became CEO was in the oil and gas industry. It was less than $1 billion 10 years ago. This business now is closing in on $20 billion of revenue. So you've got to be willing to build. And then the last thing is you've got to be willing to give. You've got to know your employees. You have to understand what makes them tick. I think, you know, the best you're going to do when you run a company like GE is people are going to question your decisions, but you never want to let them question your intentions. You put the company first. You've got to give to the people that you work with and your customers and more broadly. And I just think this notion of learn, choose, act, build, give is just the way I've thought about leadership and over 30 years at GE. So it's great to be with you. I'm happy to take questions about anything you want to talk about the world, about the company, about anything else, and we'll take it from there. So thanks very much. You want to go over there? Yep.
We're going to start over here.
Hi. Thank you very much for being here. My question is, there's a popular book out now, it's in the bestseller list, about the power of habit. I was just curious if there are any particular habits that you would use, something you do every day or try to do every day that you would attribute your success to or you just found very valuable throughout your career.
Well, my wife's here, so I kiss my wife every day. So how's that, honey? Yeah. No, I'm a big believer in discipline. I'm a big believer in, I would say, exercise. Take good care of yourself. Know that it's a marathon, in the end. And I just think the one thing I would tell you is that a habit of reading and a habit of exercise are two habits that I've never changed as time went on. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving up some of your family time to be with us tonight. We appreciate it. My question is, being a global corporation, and so many other global corporations have millions and billions of dollars overseas, how do you, at what point would you recommend the taxation to repatriate those dollars and infuse them into our economy? What is fair for the corporation and what is fair for the nation?
So first, I just want everybody to know that GE's tax rate last year was 29%. that conveniently hasn't been reported too much, but you know, we had all these write-offs in 08 and 09 that drove our tax rate down, but our tax rate last year is 29%, and in the U.S. we paid, I think, $2.5 billion of taxes. So we have a lot of money overseas, and basically there's what's called a territorial system in taxes. And fundamentally the way it works is you pay the tax rate in that country. So let's say we sold a gas turbine in Germany, and the German corporate tax rate's like 20%. We would pay the 20% in Germany. And every other country in the world has what's called a territorial system. And in a territorial system, that's the only tax you pay, is what that tax you pay in Germany, and then you can move your cash back wherever you want to. In the US, you have to true that up to 35% when you bring it back. So we're the only country in the world that doesn't have a territorial system. And so what companies do is we keep our cash overseas because our business outside the United States is growing 3 times faster than the business in the United States is growing. And we basically earn about $10 billion a year outside the United States. So we keep accumulating cash. And so, you know, this thing called repatriation would allow companies to bring it back at maybe a low tax rate that would be more like what Siemens does in Germany or what Chinese companies do in China or what Japanese companies do in Japan. So I guess just, you know, if all you did was watch MSNBC every night, right, or read the New York Times, you'd be sitting out there saying, this is a tax dodge. I don't think what I just described to you sounds like a tax dodge. I think that's what global businesses do. And, you know, look, I always try to see things through other people's points of view. I can understand why people don't want it to happen. But I can't understand why it's in the U.S.'s best interest to keep $1.2 trillion outside the United States. I just don't get it. But that's where it sits, and it's building every year. And, you know, look, I think they should bring it back. It would actually add revenue because you'd pay some tax on it. And you might be able to pass a law that would say, okay, you only get this rate, whatever it is, 5, 10, 15%, if you create jobs or if you invest it or something like that. I think that'd be fair, you know. But look, there's business guys are on one side, lots of people are on the other side. I respect their point of view. There was repatriation in 2004 or 5. It didn't really create many jobs. So there's plenty of reasons to be cynical about this at the same time. But there's a lot of cash overseas that companies basically had. And, you know, give us what Germany has. Give us what Japan has. I'm not looking for a special. And by the way, let me just say from the outset, we should do Simpson Bowles. I would urge everybody in this room to go online and read Simpson Bowles and advocate for it. We should do it now. We should do it today. It's fair. I'm not going to like everything, which you should like, right? It's just, you know, sometimes I worry that people think the issue is better than the cure. This is where the country should be right now, is doing Simpson Bowles. It has revenue raisers, or it has tax increases, and it has spending cuts. And that's what makes it fair and balanced and good. Yeah. Oops.
Mr. Immelt, first of all, thank you for your insightful comments. I agree with you on Simpson Bowles, but I can't figure out why we've made no progress. But my question is, I'd like to hear your views on leverage in the system today, and specifically with respect to GE. I'm curious, what was GE Capital's leverage going into the financial crisis? What is it today? And what do you think it should be in light of your comments on tail risk and volatility?
I think it's a great question. Look, I'd say that the pre-crisis, we were probably 8 to 1. And our Tier 1 capital as a percentage of the total was maybe 6 or 7%. And that would compare to banks that were maybe 35 to 1 and 3%. Now we're 4 to 1 leverage, and we're 11% Tier 1 capital. So, you know, it's ironic, right? Our margins have never been better, we've never been safer, and people hate the business. You know, so I always say, like, when you have a good business that people hate, that's usually when there's opportunity, you know? It's really, now, look, I think we let it get too big. I take the blame for that. We let it get too big before the crisis. I think maybe 30% of our earnings, low leverage, reduce the amount of debt outstanding. It can be a business that our investors can be proud of and feel safe about. And I think we're pretty much in that boat today. And look, I've never really, in public anyhow, denounced the regulation. I might kick my dog every now and then. But, you know, better, stronger regulation of financial services is probably where we should be and probably better for the system overall. Okay? Yeah.
I have a question about real estate. You mentioned that you thought generally that the market had bottomed. And so my question relates to GE Capital, some of which I think you've already addressed, but maybe if there's some other issues to look at. I was just curious, are all of the write-offs of bad GE Capital real estate loans and equity positions completed, or is there more to go, and if so, how much?
No, look, I think commercial real estate, now that we never did housing or construction loans or things like that. Commercial real estate got better faster than anybody predicted. And the reason is because interest rates have been so low. And with low interest rates, investors want higher yield. And it turns out that owning real estate is probably the only way you can get, you know, so if you're an investor, if you're an insurance company, and 10-year treasuries are like 1.9%, you're toast. I mean, in other words, you can't run an insurance company with that kind of yield. So do you guys get what I'm saying? I'm trying not to, so you need a little bit of assets in there that give yield. And so what people have done is bought commercial real estate. So we'll actually earn money in commercial real estate this year. I would never have, none of our pro formers ever had that. And, you know, it's going to be a better business faster than anybody thought it was going to be, but don't worry, we're not going to let it get big again. But it's just, you know, it's just the way low interest rates have worked. So I'd say our losses are much lower. You know, the losses are lower in financial services, the margins are better, and there's fewer competitors. Leverage is lower, so you've got more liquidity, leverage is lower, losses are lower, fewer competitors, better margins. So probably at one time, maybe a decade ago, our financial service earnings traded at a 40 PE, let's say, with higher leverage, less cash, worse margins, and more competition. Now we're an 8 PE with better margins, fewer competitors, more leverage. So there's no CEO on earth that thinks their stock is fairly valued, but there's an opportunity in there somewhere, would be the way I would think about it in the short term. You know, those things equalize over time. Yeah.
I wanted you to extend your remarks about the corporate tax rate. Recently, the New York Times did an intensive attack on Apple on their tax rate, and the implication was that they were a bad corporate citizen and weren't doing their own share. You said you pay 29% tax. Didn't GE for a period of time pay no corporate taxes? Was there a period?
Oh, in 10 it was 7, very low. The last couple of years, in 9 it was negative because we lost money in GE Capital and stuff like that. So, yeah.
But even the comments were about local taxes and taking things out of California and moving them to Nevada and all that sort of thing. Do you face those sort of problems? Are you worried?
Look, you know,
about
we
those
try
sort of
to. I think, you know, we want to pay what we owe. We want a but we work to optimize our tax rate, you know, like most companies do. I'd make a couple comments. The first thing I'd say is, I think everybody in this room, I know I certainly do, have great appreciation for why people are angry. Great appreciation. High unemployment, doesn't seem fair, wealth discrepancy. I'm extremely reflective of that and appreciative of that. And, you know, I didn't dig it so much when they're outside my house, you know. I'm not sure my neighbors liked it all that much. But I never once, you know, said to myself that I always had empathy, and I understand why the Occupy Wall Street movement exists. I understand why people are angry. I really do. I'd make two comments, though. The first thing I'd say is the only way ultimately to feel better as a country is to create jobs. There's only one road out of here, guys. You know, my dad worked at GE. I've kind of worked my way up through the company. I've never lost sight. You know, I always, you know, tell my daughter about back in the day. You know, we all lecture our kids about how much harder it was. But when I was going to school, none of us had summer internships. We all worked in factories when we went to college. So I've always seen how proud GE people are of their work. And I've never lost sight that people want to work. So regardless of how we got to where we got to, I think we've lost sight of the only way to make people feel better again is to create economic wealth and jobs. And that ought to be our focus, number one. Number two, the tax system is broken. We need reform. But the president's own counsel put together a great game plan in 2010 that has largely been thrown in a dustbin. Why can't we take what Simpson Bowles laid out and just do it? And then, you know, you wouldn't have to worry about Apple or GE or anybody else. We'd all be running the same play together, and we'd all be kind of in this together. But, you know, my job is to sell gas turbines. It's somebody else's job to pass tax law in the end. And the blueprint has been laid out there. And I don't see any reason why it can't happen. And I think the fact that the people in this room or the people that write these newspapers have not made anybody accountable for that fact is also has to be viewed as something that's wrong and something that needs to change. We have every day something called Simpson Bowles that is a blueprint for action that is, you know, what would you do if you were running a business and said, I've got a problem I got to solve, I've got a big deficit, we got to figure out how to raise revenue, we got to figure out how to lower cost. You're running your company, you're running your bank, you're running your business. You'd say, let's do this. Let's put together a task team of our smartest people and then do what they say. Well, we did all that. You know, we've done all that, except we pretend like it doesn't exist. So I wish some of these articles would be written about Simpson Bowles. Deficit reduction, let's go. Then we should have in the loopholes, flat tax. I guarantee you, I will not like it all, but we'll adjust and move on with life. So, is that okay? You know, I just think it's something that is missing.
I wanted to ask you about manufacturing. You mentioned the decision to open up a plant in Louisville making appliances, and there's been kind of a flurry of manufacturing coming back to the U.S. and lots of talk about labor shortages in China. Just curious how you kind of see those trends play out over the next few years and how you guys approach the decision of where to make things.
You know, again, I joined GE in 1982, and I would say from 1982 till about 2003, labor was expensive and material was cheap. And now, you know, when you think about steel and copper and things like that, material's expensive, and labor as a percentage of total cost has gone down. So that gives you more utility from a standpoint of where you can make things. Now, in things like jet engines or gas turbines, labor is a low percentage of the total, number one. Number two, American workers are really good, very productive, very flexible. And so I think our American manufacturing base is very, very good. And we tend to globalize now. When we globalize manufacturing, it's more to access markets than it is for cheap labor. So I just think that's been kind of arbitraged out of the system. In the case of appliances, the products we sourced from China and Mexico weren't very good. The quality wasn't very good. The workmanship wasn't as good. And so I just think that's why it made sense to ultimately move that back. Yeah.
Regarding healthcare, you mentioned that you exercise, take good care of yourself, and plan for the personal long term. So why haven't we heard any discussion in the healthcare debate about personal healthcare choices, personal health responsibility, and taking responsibility for your own health as part of the solution? And what do you think that corporations such as GE can do about that?
I'm with you. You know, in 2009, we put GE employees on a high deductible healthcare plan. And basically what it said is if you, depending on how much money you make, if you get, all prevention is paid for, so physicals and stuff like that are paid for. And then, you know, we cap how much your out-of-pocket is. Let's say, depending on how much you make, let's say at $8,000 or $6,000 or whatever. So if your spouse had pancreatic cancer or something like that, we're going to take good care of you, right? But $1 was on you. So if you wanted Lipitor instead of a generic, you paid. If you sprained your ankle on a weekend playing touch football, you had to decide whether to go to the bucket of ice or an emergency room. And you get a one-time, and by the way, we did a year of training beforehand, and we have 623 sites in the US, and we basically had 23 parameters of health in those 623 sites. What kind of diet, they all have fitness centers, blah, 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 blah. And so we treated healthcare like safety. And that one change gives you a one-time reduction of 20%. So the day I did it, I wasn't the most popular person, but you know, I'm a 30-year guy. It's the first time Andy and I actually sat down and discussed our healthcare plan in 30 years. So that's when you know you're doing something right. And I'm not here tonight to espouse any particular political position. I'm really not. I'm a centrist, really, by background. But based on what I've seen, I now say it's inevitable that you're going to have some kind of consumer-directed in Medicare. It's inevitable. So, you know, I don't say that. I'm not running for anything. I'm not trying to cause a fight. I don't want you to, but having seen that, you know, to your point, now everything our employees save, they can pocket in their retirement plan. So ultimately, what we want to do is change people's behaviors. We're not looking to, you know, defer or to change the income stream. What you need to do is change behaviors. You need people to take care of themselves, to exercise, to do all those things. That ultimately, and now our unions are on the same plan. Again, not trying to hurt them at all. Now, when we moved the jobs back from Mexico and China to Louisville, the people make, let's say, $35,000 a year, hourly folks, $35,000, $40,000 a year. You know, healthcare and pension is another $20,000, $25,000 on top of that sometimes. This country's never going to create jobs unless we do something about healthcare cost. And making people more accountable is, in the end, the only way we're going to be able to do that. Now, the other thing I tell you is that if you take the lowest GE site on a dollars per employee, the lowest GE town to the highest GE town, right? It's twice more expensive, 2x. So why would Greenville, South Carolina be twice as expensive as Schenectady, New York on a dollar per employee basis? That's the other thing you have to cure, which is just bizarre. I mean, it's just nuts when you think about it.
Last week, there was this article on The Economist about the third industrial revolution. So it's the digitization of manufacturing, and it says that some of the manufacturing jobs coming back to America. I'm working for a financial software company, but I still see the growth of hiring a lot of jobs out in India. But at the same time, there's a lot of inflationary measures that's going up too. Do you see that it's really coming, some of the jobs are coming back here in America after 5 years once our economy is much better, or it really all depends?
Look, I think it's, in the end, it's mainly about economics, and value, and what I would say is that manufacturing in the U.S. today is probably within 25-30% of China, and software is probably within 25 or 30% of India, and the numbers are closing quickly. So when we globalize today, by and large, we're globalizing to access markets. If you want to win in Brazil, you got to do stuff in Brazil. If you want to win in China, you got to do stuff in China. If you want to win in Russia, you got to do stuff in Russia. You got to manufacture. So most of our globalization today is all about winning in markets. I'd say for most of the early part of my career, from let's say 1982 to 2000, most of the globalization was about chasing low-cost labor. Those days are over, fundamentally. I mean, it's not going to end that abruptly, but fundamentally, it's more about markets today than it is about chasing low-cost labor. And the other thing I'd say is that I remember in the 1990s, we said, making jet engines is our front room, software is somebody else's front room, let's outsource all of our software. Today, that's dumb. So every company, no matter what you are doing, from financial services to jet engines and everywhere in between, software is a part of your business. I spent some time with Mark Andreessen. Friday, I was in Silicon Valley. Brilliant entrepreneur, hot venture capitalist, and he's got this saying like, software eats the world. And after an hour and a half, I'm like, I'm kind of like, oh my God, I'm dashing off emails on the plane, we got to do this, we got to do that, let's go, come on, we got to move faster. So it's just, software is a part of everybody's business today in a big way. How you doing?
Hi there. I work for a local nonprofit called Horizons, and specifically I work with kids who are from low-income families, and the kids that I work with actually are the high school age kids. So I'm trying to help them get prepared for college. You mentioned community colleges, and we're really lucky to have NCC locally, which is a wonderful opportunity for a lot of our kids. It's very difficult for me to help them get prepared because of the lack of resources in the local public schools. And I'm not speaking of New Canaan. Most of my kids are in Norwalk and Stamford. But as most of us know in this room, we have a really difficult situation in our state in the public schools. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. And I know our governor is working hard to try to get issues on the table. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the future.
Look, I think educate, if you could wait, right? Because I think we have to do more things short term, but if you said, what would be the one thing in this country that 20 years from now, if you worked on, you knew it would lead to job creation and competitiveness and wealth, it would be education. We just have such a bad education issue not just in the state, but around the country. There's people that would be smart about this than I am, but we basically have gone into Stanford and given them $25 million over 5 years, fundamentally focused on math and science in the public schools, really trying to take underprivileged. We do the same thing in Erie, Louisville, Cincinnati, Milwaukee. It's probably 75% of our corporate giving is in these big grants where we send our people and we try to work with the teachers and the administrators, and we think it's incredibly important. The second thing I've learned is that you've got to map the jobs that are going to be in Connecticut, and we ought to be taking high school seniors and putting them in curriculum that's getting them ready for those jobs. So they ought to be studying healthcare technician work as a senior in high school. And then they ought to go spend 2 years at Norwalk Community College, and they ought to be a radiology tech. There is a need for nurses, radiology techs, anything in healthcare. And I don't know enough about Connecticut, unfortunately, because I travel, we've lived in New Canaan for 10 years, and I probably know 5 streets' names. And so I'm not as articulate about Connecticut as I can be, but if I were governor, if I were a mayor, I would map the open jobs to the people. Jobs cannot be filled in the macro. They can only be filled in the micro. Does that make sense to you guys? And so what you need to be doing is saying there's going to be 5,000 open jobs in Bridgeport in the next 2 years. This is specifically where they're going to be. And how do we get people from point A to point B into those jobs? And that's why high schools and community colleges are extremely important to march people down that pathway. And that's where I think we've got to do a better job. Yeah. Is there somebody over here? I'm sorry. That's okay.
GE's done such a great job developing leaders. I see it in the marketplace with folks who are either at GE or have left. What are 1 or 2 things you are doing with your leadership development and what you want to see in your leaders now as opposed to maybe 10 years ago when you took over?
So it's a great question. I think leadership in business has almost no shelf life. So you got to be working about every 5 years on new approaches to leadership. And one of the things we did in 2009 is we sent 30 senior leaders to see 100 institutions around the world to see what they were teaching people. So we went to places like Google, the US Military Academy, the Communist Party School in Beijing. I mean, we went all over the world and kind of said, okay, what's the future going to be? What do you need to be training people on? Things like that. And then we try to build a set of traits that you can coach, you can teach, that we think best prepare people to lead in where we are today. So today it's about decisiveness, it's about external focus, it's about imagination, courage, it's about inclusiveness. So we try to build leadership traits, and we redo that about every 5 years. And it's really an evergreen process. I would say the one trait that in every successful leader, I would say maybe 2 traits I've seen in every successful leader that I've ever met. One is they're a learner. They have a constant antenna, constant thirst for education. I always tell people the best part about running GE is that everybody will have lunch with you once, everybody in the world. You have to earn the second time, but you can see, if you're running GE, you can see Warren Buffett, you can be friends with Warren Buffett. You can actually probably see, I haven't done this, but you could actually probably see the Dalai Lama or something like that if you wanted to. I don't want to do that. And everywhere in between. So you can learn from a lot of different people. And the other thing is, I think it's every successful leader enjoys mundane tasks. In other words, has an eye for detail and sees a joy in things that are meaningful at a low level. So everybody thinks that a CEO is about, big visions, and that's important, right? But if you are a great learner, and if you have great appreciation for the guts of what you do, every good leader I've ever seen has those 2 things. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, a guy who I have immense respect for, He's always out hunting for ideas. And if you hire somebody from Amazon, they are well trained, they understand fundamentals of consumer marketing, things like that, and you sit and say, Bezos, Howard Schultz of Starbucks, Fred Smith. Fred Smith is my own personal hero from FedEx. I love Fred. He's like, they should just do a bust of him somewhere, But Fred is like, he's got this incredible passion for change. But if you ran into Fred on the street, he'd tell you we had 17 packages that were late in Nairobi yesterday. And you say, my God, not only is he the founder, the builder, he's been doing it 40 years, but he has this thirst for details and knowledge that you just fall in love with people like that. And you learn to sniff the BS meter for people that just want to stay at 30,000 feet all the time. You talk to somebody and if all they're giving you is platitudes, you start looking at your watch saying, okay, I got to go do something else. And when I go on customer calls, whether I go to a hospital CEO or a financial service CEO or anything like that, I'm always searching the office for something that ties them to the essence of what they do. A slogan, a picture, anything. So if you walked in my office, you would see 15 pictures of our products. You'd see a big honking jet engine, a big MR scanner, right? And you'd sit there and say, this guy likes the stuff in his company. You don't see pictures of me and Tom Brokaw, even though I love Tom, right? If I walked in Jeff Immelt's office and said he's got a big poster of Tom Brokaw, honey, you're still there. You and Sarah are still there, but if you saw it, you'd say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Where are his products?
Here's our last
Okay,
question.
great.
Given the partisan realities of American politics, any movement on the issues you referenced through legislation seems like a near impossibility. So the status quo is the probable outcome, right? Given that, where do you believe American competitiveness is going to be in 2020 or 2025?
Well, I think you raise a good question. I think in some ways you have to prepare your companies for a reality that says we could be in gridlock for a long time. So you've got to prepare your company for, we're big in the energy business. I personally think the U.S. could be dominant in energy in the next decade. I have my own views. I personally believe that global warming is a fact. I personally believe that natural gas is a treasure. I believe all those things, but I just think the likelihood of any kind of energy leadership coming out of Washington is zero, right? So if you're in our company and you're big in energy and you've made big bets in energy, you have to be ready to run the company as if there'll be no presence of the government in the coming time. So I think you have to be prepared for the reality that you could have gridlock. I think in the end, though, I believe in what makes the U.S. great are the people. And I think in the end, I travel the world extensively, and I can tell you that this is still a hugely respected country. And I would say that the enterprise system, despite our flaws and the mistakes that we all made, myself included, we're still the most respected capital system, the most respected commercial system in the world. I would tell you that I've done this a long time. American business is more competitive vis-a-vis China, India, the rest of the world than we have been in decades. So I am humbly confident that we can have some pretty good times, be productive, and be competitive. I think we need, leadership that brings us together. I think leadership that brings us together. Look, we're not perfect. GE's not perfect. Okay, I get that, right? I don't need to read it. But we are participants in the system. We can help drive change. We can do things to move forward. But I think it would be better if we could just take some certain steps. And I would, again, start with Simpson balls. I would start with deficit reduction, both because it's financially important, but also because it's spiritually important. It would allow us to put some of these debates in the rearview mirror so that people can go to work on job creation, which is the only thing that's going to make the population ultimately happy and satisfied. And that's the way I would view the system. So it's been great to be with you. Give to the New Canaan Library, okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great.
The library and of the committee, we thank you, Mr. Immelt, for a really intriguing and motivational talk. I think it lifted us all up, so thank you very much for that. And I also get to invite all of you to please join us in the downstairs Fireside Commons room. Thank you all for coming.